Hello and welcome to The Print. My name is Debdutta, and today we are in conversation with Sara Wahedi. Sara is a trailblazer in her own right. She is the Chief Executive Officer of Civaam. Born in Afghanistan's Kabul, she is now a global voice for AI for conflict affected regions in the global south. She is also the founder of Ehtesab, and Ehtesab is Afghanistan's first citizen engagement app that delivers real time alerts in a country beset by uncertainty. From launching her startup with a mere $2,500 to earning global accolades, now being a Clarendon Scholar to Oxford, Sara has emerged as one of the most influential young leaders shaping technology for social impact. She recently graduated from Oxford, so we'll begin with that. Congratulations, Sara, and welcome to the print.
Thank you so much, Debdutta, and it is an honor to be with you today. Thank you for having me.
Sarah, before we go into the your professional work and the aspects of that, we would like to begin with something personal. And I know that you have lived through a war, you have lived through exile. There's a startup life, there's global recognition, and all of this by the age of 30. If you could please tell our viewers what your journey has been like, what are the challenges, and what is coming next for Sarah?
When you frame it like that, I didn't really realize that I've had such an incredible journey, but it's so humbling to hear it from you, Debdutta. It's been such an overwhelming journey. I started this when I was 21, 22 years old, just with an idea that, those who live in crisis regions, or for example, my hometown of Kabul, why is it that these tools that keep people safe, why is it that they're not accessible to everyone? And why are they so expensive? And what I'm so proud of is that regardless of the last almost decade, I've been able to really keep that mission alive, which is before an exorbitant amount of profit making or any sort of other reason behind the technology that we build, it's really fundamentally about technology that's meant to keep people safe and informed, especially with this new AI frontier. So it's been a rewarding journey. It's been amazing, and also all of the work that I do, I keep, for example, my family at the helm. My mom is a huge component for me as a designer, as a technologist. I think about her and her journey as a refugee and a lot of the things that we build because we work with women and girls mainly. And in terms of what's next, I'd love to continue scaling Civaam, especially getting to visit India and so many people in this tech space. I would love to learn from the best of the best and see how we can collaborate and work on projects that also impact India and its amazing communities across the country. So the goal is really to learn more about different countries across the world, particularly in South Asia, Southeast Asia, and Africa, and to really focus and decenter AI just particularly from the US and from Europe, but really to understand how we can find brilliant technologists across the world and really center them in development. I'm also writing a book, which is really exciting, and I hope that will be published within the next year. And it really talks about my mom's journey, her sisters, and the women of my family of escaping the first Taliban regime. So it's been such a rewarding experience also to document their story.
How would you describe it I know saying a question like describing it in one word is difficult, but if you had to describe your journey, what would it be like?
Honestly, it would be I would define it as a dream. Sometimes, especially when I was walking through Oxford, or to be able to go back in a couple of weeks, I don't really connect it. I mean, the way that I can actually tell a story about this is the first book I ever read in English was Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. And it was the first book I saw on a stand when I was in Canada. We had just arrived as refugees, and I saw it at a school book fair when I was just starting school in Canada. And I remember begging my mom, I just saw the cover. I didn't know anything about what it was, and it was about Harry going to Hogwarts. And as many people know, J.K. Rowling, the author, wrote it with this idea that Oxford was actually, it was based on Oxford, the school Hogwarts. So the fact that the first thing I ever really read in English or started to learn the English language was eventually the school that I ended up to really does feel like destiny for me. Um, And also, I felt so grateful that during my year at Oxford, I was able to give lectures, I was able to do many talks where I was able to talk about the Afghan experience, but really to show Afghanistan in a different light than just a very conflict affected region or a conflict affected country, but to really talk about the human experience. So it was a dream come true. I still pinch myself sometimes. I still can't imagine that it happened, but I even also think about the first time that I showed my mom Oxford. It was just such a beautiful experience to show her that this dream that I had, which was sustainable, ethical, intentional technology, could also lead to something like this. So it's been a dream come true for me.
And Sarah, we'll talk a little bit about your app, Ehtesab. So, if you could, to begin with, if you could talk to us about the inspiration behind it, what led you to work towards something like this, and even after the Taliban takeover in 2021, Ehtesab kept running. And I remember you once talked about how the app had deleted all digital traces of female employees in order to protect them, in order to protect their identities, because fears grew over how the Taliban's return to power might affect women then. What what was it at that point that kept you and your team going, especially when being visible was seen as something of a danger? So how did you navigate that terrain?
So it's been a year now that we made the decision to shut down Ehtesab app live, and I'll explain why and then how we transition. So, in terms of the development of Ehtesab, so there's Ehtesab the startup, and then there's Ehtesab app. And Ehtesab the startup was something that was inspired to me because of an explosion that I had seen in downtown Kabul. ISIS-K had been attacking the Indian visa office in downtown Kabul, and it was an explosion that was right beside me. It was, just I would say 50 to 100 meters in front of me, and the whole experience was so eye-opening for me because I had friends who worked in the green zone, who worked in the US embassy, who were sending me text messages saying, Sarah, keep yourself safe, there's an explosion near your home. There were friends who had visited my home, they knew where I lived. And I said, can I send this to my family, to my friends? I mean, how do you have access to such incredible technology? And they said, this is something we're getting from the US government. This is something we're getting from UN agencies. I don't think it's available to everyday Afghans. And for me, that was a light bulb moment because I thought, my family, my friends, we don't live behind these concrete walls. How is it that this is not something that we can build or that we can use as Afghans? And of course, not just us. I mean, there are green zones across the world in conflict affected regions. So it was this light bulb moment for me where I felt so frustrated that things that can keep people safe, sending alerts, isn't available to the local population. And once I started Ehtesab, the startup, to build ideas like this, I worked and collaborated with a co-founder, one of the biggest and best tech companies in Afghanistan, to build the Ehtesab app, and the both of us together. But we had a brilliant team that saw this through. And even to this day, I'm so proud that we had the first female CTO in Afghanistan, who's now gone on and done brilliant things. She escaped and sought asylum in the US, and now she's doing amazing work in the United States, working in AI and data science. So it's something that was a small idea that led to so much. Obviously, the world tuned in, and once Afghanistan collapsed, all of those alert systems by the US government, by the UN, they had all shut down. And suddenly we were getting emails from across the world to this startup where the average age was 22, saying, we need to evacuate this person. We have this embassy that needs support. We have women whose lives are in danger. Can you help us get out of Afghanistan? I mean, this was probably one of the biggest responsibility that I had been given at such a young age, to maneuver this with our team. But unfortunately, after the Taliban came into power, the team was in constant danger. We had to evacuate our office. We went completely remote. And as the global interest in Ehtesab grew, the Taliban made it more impossible for us to work. So I made the very difficult decision with our team to shut down the app, and then said, how can we keep the work going in a covert way, in kind of ways that the Taliban can't track, which is why we started our new startup called Civaam.
And Sarah, in many ways, while Ehtesab was about visibility, now you're developing, covert systems for women to access healthcare, education, and jobs because you want to again keep it behind the purview of the Taliban so that they can't access it while providing accessibility to the women. So how do you balance, a kind of transparency with security, and then your move from Ehtesab to Civaam, how did that shape up and what lies next for it?
So it was 2024, 2023 when I realized that if I wanted to continue working on more innovative ideas, Ehtesab had become such a dangerous name. Because we had many governments and agencies say, well, this is a brilliant idea. Would you be willing to build something else? And the more that our name was connected to different new innovations and different governments, I think that that was when the Taliban realized that this is becoming problematic. And Ehtesab as a name, although it became a brand, it became very difficult and very unsafe for the team to continue working under this name. The team was, there was constant house raids happening, arrests of our team members, and it was just impossible for us to do anything new. So it was 2020 through 2024 that I decided that slowly we would transition out of Ehtesab and use Civaam to essentially be this new flagship startup that we were able to do different things with it. And it was the decrees that came out where the Taliban was saying, bit by bit, the schools were closing, women had to wear full veil, they wouldn't be able to, you shouldn't be hearing their voice in public. I realized that things were going to get much worse. And if we wanted to use a technology that exists in Afghanistan to support a lot of the amazing work that Afghans are doing, it has to be covert. For example, I'll kind of give you an example of the way that we think, but it's really about camouflaging a lot of the daily processes that people have, whether it's the radio, whether it's going to the market, or meeting in cafes, trying to really decenter these everyday systems to become like underground railroad networks where we can get work done where the Taliban couldn't track it. So we've changed everything. There's really no system that we've worked on that is kind of the status quo, in order to do the work that we can so that the Taliban can't track us. And the unfortunate thing about that is, whereas with Ehtesab, people knew exactly how it worked. It was an alert system, it was an app. With Civaam, the covert aspect means that publicly we're always having to speak in layman's terms, because otherwise there's just no way to keep these systems safe. And the thing that has been so profound for us is when we're able to perhaps connect a doctor to someone who really needs urgent gender-based violence support. And we've been able to do that for a year or so. And it's been incredible to be able to build a system, but also terrifying, because we want to be able to do it in a way that we can slowly scale, but also knowing that if God forbid anything happened, the Taliban will be able to track us. So the goal is to continue the work, continue to utilize AI to be something that guides us. That there's so many new innovations coming out with AI where we can work on covert platforms and design things in a way that they couldn't really be tracked by the Taliban. But it takes time and it takes a lot of creativity. And this is why I believe that working with technologists who come from these regions, who come from these places, is important. Because if you're living in New York City and you're a designer, or you're living in London or Paris, you're not going to be able to really understand those processes. So that's why I really focus on finding the best local talent in any country that we work in, because they know the context. And I'll give an idea that we had this idea for Afghan women to basically send in reports against the Taliban for the International Court of Justice. And the first design that we made, because we didn't consult in the first stage, we just wanted to do a small design with Afghan women, they said, oh my gosh, please don't do this. This is going to put us in danger. Let's talk about this. And then we made the decision that we would not design anything, even in the beginning, even in consulting phase, without Afghan women or any women that we work with across the world, because they know what works best. And I think that that's really what places us out from any other AI startup in the world that's working on this, because we don't rely on global talent within the global north or the west, but we know that the talent really does come in from these local communities, and that's how we build.
Absolutely. And what perhaps I individually like best is how you place women at the forefront. It is a women-led, it's an initiative that is led by women in a space where increasingly their visibility is diminishing. But also as an aside, I just wanted to know what do the terms Ehtesab and Civaam mean?
So a part of the designing that I do is I could have chosen a word that was English or something that maybe the Western world can really absorb. But as you know, so many languages in India and so many languages across the world, it's important for our collaborators across the world to know about where we come from. So Ehtisab is a word that I'm really proud that now, when I speak to journalists or others, they've learned how to say it and ask the meaning, because I want to decenter technology in that way. And I didn't want to make a Western based term. So Ehtisab is a cognate use of different words in Dari and Pashto, Afghanistan's two main languages. It's also Ehtisab means accountability in Urdu. But for the Afghan context, it stems from accountability, transparency, community, and that's how we built this new term, Ehtisab. But it has little stems from all these different languages to become this new phrase. But at the helm, it translates to accountability and transparency. And then for Civaam, very similar. So I put in two words together. I tried to this time make it more global. So civic for community and connectivity in the English language, and then which in Farsi and in Arabic means community. So they both mean the same thing, but I put both together. So there's civic, and then there's and so that became Civaam.
It's also in Urdu, awam is people. In India, when we say aam log, we say the common people, the civilians.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So it's just nice when it's, yeah, I've had Indian colleagues reach out and say, is there some sort of Indian connection? And I said, I believe yeah, I think there's something within the Indian context that also connects. So I'm really happy, because the goal really is that Civaam and Ehtesab were never meant to be connected to just one community. We build technology across the world now. So it's really supposed to be, the people's platform. So that's how I've gone about building technology, is that everyone should be involved in the development of this tech.
Absolutely, that's wonderful. And building from what you said, moving on, you deal a lot with how AI can be used, for in conflict affected regions, of course, but also how it can be used as a part of civic tech to help the people in need. What is your vision for tech, especially civic tech, ethical AI, to work under, say, authoritarian regimes like the Taliban? Help is being given to people. When you deal with technology in such a manner, what is your vision for how it can, how you can deal with these issues under authoritarian regimes? Are there certain precautions you take? Are there certain lines that you ensure that you never cross in order to maintain that, in order to also maintain that accountability, which is like everything that symbolizes your initiative, to maintain that transparency, but also to ensure that there's a certain level of protection that is given to the people who are coming in the forefront and doing this for others?
That's a great question. So it really is, unfortunately, a lot of trial and error. For one of the recent projects that we worked on, which was more healthcare oriented, we had to start very small. So I would say that from the time we started working on the idea to actually developing something, it took about a year and a half. And the reason for that was I was not willing to take the risk of building something without monitoring how it would look like on a day-to-day basis. So I wanted to understand how women are accessing healthcare right now, specifically gender-based violence support, because what happened in 2023, in the month of December, the Taliban announced that all women's shelters would be banned. And there was approximately, I believe, 23 across the country that were run by different agencies across Afghanistan. So I realized that the restrictions were happening faster than the innovation. And that meant that perhaps the scaling and the design and testing that could happen in other countries where an authoritative regime doesn't exist was not possible in Afghanistan. So it took a really long time for us to do that. And then in terms of testing, again, working with a very, very small team, because I had learned from Ehtesab that we had a team in total with the data analysts, researchers, developers. We had a team about 20. That was putting us in a lot of danger. So our new team was just two of us plus myself on the Civaam side. And the reason for that was that it was just so easy to track what tech companies were doing and what women were doing in activism and in protest against the Taliban. So we had to take all of these different types of steps. And I'd say that in any authoritative regime, any of these, like I said, which is why a lot of these Western systems don't work, because you cannot collaborate with the government. You're not able to collaborate with local officials. So you need to figure out strategic ways to work around the government or the authority in hand. And for us, that meant local grassroots leaders. It meant reaching out to unorthodox leaders within the community and saying, are you willing to collaborate with us? Reaching out to agencies and saying, who do you really trust on the ground that we could work with? And also, I'd say really innovative collaboration. So we didn't just work with healthcare agencies. We worked with vocational training. We worked with women who are leading local small businesses in secret. So the Taliban actually has been quite open to women having businesses, which is something that I'm still very confused about. So they're okay with women signing business contracts, opening small businesses, but schools, gender-based violence, healthcare, anything like that, they're very, very intense about that they should not exist and that women should not have any access. So trying to understand the regime and the mentality and the way that they work in, and then trying to respond in those ways. So that's where the innovation comes in. But I'd say the main learning curve for me was it is taking way more time than I think anyone is really anticipating. And that's where what I try to tell agencies and governments that I work with is the Afghan context will take a lot of time and a lot of creativity. And I think it's been a very interesting place to work with in terms of the AI space, because we don't have the same types of frameworks. We have to build everything with very little structure. So it's been a learning process, but I'd say it's been the outputs that we get, the impact that we get has been worth it. So even though it takes a lot of time, the impact that we're seeing, it makes up for all of the time lost.
I remember that while I in sorry, I'll just do this again. In one of your, I think, social media posts, you highlighted an important point while talking about Afghan women and their education. So the constant lurking fear that what if the Taliban finds out? Innocent teachers getting arrested, or even worse, that happens with women. When you design these kind of approaches and these kind of initiatives and education solutions, or like earlier we were talking about developing covert systems which are accessible to the women, be it for healthcare, education, but inaccessible to the authoritarian regimes that we were talking about. How do you approach the designing factor of it, given that there are lives at stake? And then what are the challenges that you face then? Like, what are the technical challenges? Sure, but also the ethical and the emotional challenges of ensuring that the design caters to the kind of people that you are trying to reach.
So for the last 8, 9 years, I've worked with the same director of innovation and strategic design at both Ehtesab and Civaam, and his name is Josh Worth. And Josh and I have been working almost for a decade together. And the reason why I work with him is that he is, I think, one of the best in this space of very intentional ethical design. And there's been times when Josh and I have gone back and forth on design for weeks, for months, and we take our time. And the reason for that is the design process is, we have an idea, we speak with local women, whether it was local girls or boys, community stakeholders. We just listen. We listen to their stories, we listen to the problems, we listen to the barriers. And then from there, Josh and I begin collaborating on the design. And I think that the status quo has been, you hear a pitch or you hear something, and then the designers go and the technologists start building like a prototype and say, this is what we thought of, what do you think? And I find that it doesn't, there can be a disconnect between what the local communities and users and stakeholders want to what you think that they want. And as designers, for Josh and I say designers because a big component, I think, of Civaam's work is we work on prototyping and innovation design, whereas the technology is led by our co-collaborators at a tech startup called 20 Ideas based in Oregon in the United States. But for the bulk of the work that I believe has gotten us the global accolades and the interest is the way that Josh and I have maneuvered through design. If you looked at Ehtesab's designs, or if you look at Civaam's design for a lot of the consulting that we've done for different agencies or governments or companies, it's that we have never approached it from, let us tell you what we think you should do. It's give us a couple of days or weeks of your time. We really want to understand what's going on, and then we'll start co-designing with you. And that's a new term that's been built, is co-design. And that means that you're building step by step with those who need the technology or who have requested the technology, instead of just pushing it onto them and saying, here's what we've built for you. So that's how I believe we've approached the ethical design and ethical AI usage, is, again, taking our time, centering the design and innovation with the local populations and local communities, and just going back and forth. So we don't just have these weeks of no communication or contact. We're constantly building chats, groups to say, let's design this together. And also, for Civaam, it's also understanding that AI isn't the answer to everything. And that is something that a lot of agencies maybe feel a bit uncomfortable with, because it has become a buzzword. But as someone who worked in this AI space for the last 5 years, and then just civic tech in general for the last almost decade, I know that there's a place for low tech, the mobiles, the Nokias, the brick phones, the radio, television. There's just still so much you can do with conflict affected regions that doesn't require AI, because phones are expensive. Mobile internet is expensive. In rural villages and areas, it's not possible for you to be using something that takes up so much data. So we know that there is a healthy marriage that's happening between that we're trying to build between the two, where AI can support in the back end, and where a lot of perhaps agencies can use it to help them with their work. But in terms of those who are within these regions, in these conflict affected spaces, that they're not feeling the brunt and the barriers of this new technology. So it's being very intentional and aware of what is the realistic situation on the ground. And that's how we've approached the ethical usage of AI, and then the design as well.
Right. I was actually going to come to you with a follow-up question on that, is how apps like Ehtesab and Civaam, I'm pretty sure they reach the urban areas. But what challenges do you face in if you want them to reach to the rural areas? And are they actually reaching the rural areas? Are they reaching out to the people who perhaps have lesser accessibility than, say, someone living in a city? Like you just talked about, someone who still perhaps uses a brick phone or a Nokia phone, or perhaps does not have access to that kind of internet, or like the latest tech. How do these new emerging technologies then help the people who are perhaps a little bit perhaps cut off from these kind of new innovations, and then ensures that there is a collaboration with them as well, ensures that even they are part of the picture?
It's a fantastic question, and it's so true. For Ehtesab, it was something that we realized very early on that the mobile phone, when we had at the time, I believe it was 9 or 10 million registered phones out of a population of 39 million, so one third of the population, or maybe even a quarter. So it was a very low penetration. And we were following, at the time, it was 2018, we were following India's projected rate of 80% mobile penetration by 2025. And I need to check the numbers. I'm not sure if India is there or almost there, but that was what we were assuming before the Taliban came in, that by 7-8 years, more Afghans would use smartphones. So like any technology, I built with the assumption that let's start with mobiles, with smartphones, and not just like the iPhones and Samsungs, but as you know, the OnePlus, Huawei, you know, the other phones that are more accessible in the global south, the Android phones, and build for that. So that's what we did. And then the goal was that we would also use text message. But the problem was that the government essentially shut down or collapsed a year later. So then we were just stuck to the mobile smartphone alerts because we weren't willing to negotiate with the Taliban or even work with them. And we knew that they would say, absolutely not. We're not willing to provide you a text message or short code to use the system. So we relied on people taking screenshots of Ehtesab alerts, sharing it on WhatsApp, sharing it with their local communities, posting it on Facebook to get alerts out at the community level. That was what we were trying to do. And also in terms of AI being able to facilitate the realities of those who live in rural areas, it's mainly not about AI, like I said, reaching those in the rural areas. It's helping people who build the AI build technology that can cater to the phones that they have. So for example, with the brick phone, you know, the Nokia text message based phones, now what you can do is you can build a tailor-made curriculum for those phones at the back end, so at the developer end. But those who actually interact with the text message, they're just pressing 1, 2, 3, 4, but it's made for you. So it's, hi, Sarah. So yesterday we worked on this. Today we're going to work on that, because the model is able to build a curated journey for you, but you're just seeing the text messages. So that's where the AI innovation comes in, is that we're able to make tailor-made experiences for people that we weren't able to do before. So it's really made curated one-to-one journeys easier. But we know the reality, and the reality is that it's still very difficult to get smartphones. But as they go into the system, you know, as they get recycled, and it's a very circular economy, the smartphone, because people sell them, they buy new ones, and then it goes into the local market. And I really believe that the smartphone will become so saturated in the world, where they're coming from India to Afghanistan, from China to Afghanistan. Like, you know, this is going to be a specific tool that's going to become cheaper and easier to access. And I think that that's just the global shift in terms of smartphone usage. Just like the brick phone is really cheap, the smartphone will be cheap as well, because we're just building them so quickly right now. So we're following the realities of a new normal, of a new world, where perhaps a smartphone will be the value of $5 to $10 in the next decade, or 2 decades. And I think that that will happen, very much so. And also that Afghans are aware of the restrictions by the Taliban. And we had done a research about smartphone usage, and 87% of Afghans who did not have a smartphone said that more than gold, it would be the next investment they make, because they know that schools are shut down, it's very difficult to access anything anymore, and the internet is the new escape from these restrictions. So the goal is that we can work fast enough and build innovation so we can work around the Taliban's restrictions, but this is the new normal, and we're building step by step.
And it's also ironic because I just remembered the last conversation that we had on how the Taliban is now using, the internet and the social media to, project Afghanistan as a landscape that is open to tourism, that is open to markets, business. So it's actually ironically inviting Americans, and it's inviting women to come visit Afghanistan, and yet, there is very little collaboration between the government and civilians in such a situation. And Sarah, also the kind of geopolitical situation where this government is increasingly gaining recognition. There are Russia to begin with has recognized the Taliban government. What kind of collaboration would you like to see between, you know, technology and countries that can bring that technology to places like the global south, use it in a proper way, and put some kind of a pressure? What does, in this case, what does meaningful pressure look for you? What do you think meaningful pressure should look like?
So someone had asked me this yesterday and said, Sarah, okay, the schools are closed and the Taliban is continuing these restrictions. They have been arresting women this week. We're at, about 200 women that they've arrested, detained, and asked to take it for questioning because they're not wearing the full black veil or showing their faces. And I said, the robust diplomacy that we should be seeing, that we're seeing in Syria or other areas, that's not happening in Afghanistan. In Syria, you're seeing flocks of countries trying to understand the new Syrian government, trying to understand, this new normal in Syria. That's not happening in Afghanistan. We've seen a complete, hands-off approach with Afghanistan. And that's my answer, is that the robust, innovative, creative diplomacy that we need to see in Afghanistan is not happening. And that's where a lot of the limitations exist, especially for those of us who work in the tech space, because without safe pathways for us to build technology and scale, we're just putting people's lives in danger. And that's what's been quite frustrating for me, is I can build AI centered, small classroom oriented solutions, but I can't do that if I'm putting teachers' lives at risk or students' lives at risk. So it's the fact that the world has been so hands off on Afghanistan is one of the reasons why we continuously have this problem. But the Taliban is also very aware that it needs to shape up its image in different ways so the world is willing to interact. So that's why we're seeing now that they've announced that thousands of business certificates were signed for women in the last year, because they're very much obsessed with how do we make Afghanistan as you know as independent as possible without relying on other countries for their legitimacy. And that's why they're willing to let women sign business certificates where maybe the woman just sits at home and manages a business. She doesn't leave the home, but she can't go to school. She cannot study anything. She cannot go to the hospital without herself. She can't even speak in public. So there's so much hypocrisy in the way that they are maneuvering this. And I think it's also telling that the Taliban probably didn't imagine the world would actually be so hands off. I think that they are also just able to release these new decrees and do, execute these raids in public and arrest these women because the world has turned a cold shoulder. And until we see that robust diplomacy return in Afghanistan, which does not mean a return to the country, it means figuring out how to approach this emergency situation, the erasure of women and girls, but also that, this also has detrimental issues for boys. We're seeing madrasas completely take over the schools. So I would actually say it's not just an erasure of girls, it's an erasure of boys. And the future of Afghanistan is completely uncertain. And the world can intervene, but it's choosing not to. And that is having the detrimental effects that we see today.
Absolutely. And Sarah, this has been a fantastic conversation, and I had a lot of questions, but of course, we are running out of time. But before ending it, I have one final question for you, and that is, as a woman, as a woman who has an Afghan identity, how do you see the current landscape in Afghanistan going ahead for the women in the country? Do you think it will be better now that, like innovations and especially initiatives that people like you are bringing on, where you center the women who are constantly being decentered, constantly being erased? You talk about their health, access to healthcare. You talk about education policies that should ensure that they are, they have a place in the room, they are being talked about. What do you think the future looks like for Afghan women in 2025, or perhaps say a decade from now?
I I don't see it changing, to be honest, if we don't see an absolute worldwide global condemnation of what's happening. And the Taliban is using other axes of power to legitimize itself, whether it's through Russia or China. And I really see that this is going to be some sort of regime like similar to Iran for the last 40 years that won't disappear. And that's why I'm constantly speaking to the public or speaking to the media that this is an emergency situation. The Taliban, the fact that this is the only country where it has been systematized that women cannot go to school, that boys are learning extremist ideology through the madrasa, this is a dire situation. And right now we have 14, 15 million girls who are of age to study and to continue their degrees, and they're not able to. And I mean, how much more dire can this be? This is a slow erasure. I mean, it was a fast erasure of the system for protections for women and the systems of frameworks and of school and education and healthcare. But it is a slow erasure of a generation that we may never see again, a generation that will not study, that will not be able to do anything. And technology, even though I believe so much as a technologist in technology, I know that it can only do so much without the governments and the international community siding with us and saying, okay, for aid, we will not provide any more aid until you have these types of benchmarks. We will not allow China and Russian businesses, Chinese and Russian businesses, or anyone who does business with Afghanistan to not have sanctions. Or we're not seeing those kinds of really just creative legal interventions that can scare these groups and individuals to say, okay, the Taliban, you really have to change things up because this is really putting restrictions on the way that we can work. We've seen none of those things. So I feel, unfortunately, very, very concerned for the future of Afghanistan, extremely concerned. And I hope that with Civaam's work, to deal with the emergency at hand, but to continue the advocacy that I'm trying to do, to bring awareness to Afghanistan, I truly feel that our team and the work that we're doing is, we're kind of like at war with the Taliban. I really do believe that. I believe that we are one of the few bastions of protection and standing up for women. I mean, I've been harassed, I have been stalked, I have had death threats, and it just goes to show that the Taliban feels very much threatened, and their supporters, by groups like ours or women like myself or other women colleagues who are saying that enough is enough. And for me, I use technology as a form of protest. This is the way that I am fighting back against the Taliban, and I hope that the world supports us, and I hope that we finally see that creative emergency diplomacy we need to combat this erasure of half the population across Afghanistan.
Absolutely. With that, Sarah, I mean, I think that's a very hopeful note to end on. And I am so glad that we had this conversation and I was able to talk to you because people like you are showing the way. People like you are lighting up a way for women, for the general population in places where, there is so much uncertainty right now. So you are extremely courageous, and this has been a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much, Sarah. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Debdutta. Thank you so much.